If you're a pharmacist and you want to end up a multi-millionaire or increase your income to 150K plus, keep watching this video because I'm going to walk through steps on how to do each. I'm Kristin Burton. I'm a critical care PA and the founder of Millionaires in Medicine, where we help medical professionals learn to clear debt and build wealth. We actually have a ton of free resources on specifically how PharmDs can maximize their professional lives and financial lives inside the Millionaires in Medicine Club. It's totally free. You can go below, click the link, get access to that. But in this video, we're going to specifically walk through student loan pearls, especially for pharmacists pursuing a residency, how you can maximize your income, and how you can invest to build wealth and specifically hit that multimillionaire mark. So let's dive in. Pharmacy is a really interesting profession because there's so many different professional modalities you can choose from that the financial strategy at play ends up changing a lot depending on if you're a clinical pharmacist, a retail pharmacist, you go into industry, etc. So first, let's talk about the student loan piece and how different aspects of the professional journey you choose will play into that. Now, I'm going to really lean into federal student loans because that's the most common loan structure for pharmacists graduating today. But if you have a lot of private student loan debt, some of this stuff won't apply. If you choose to be a clinical pharmacist, that means you're likely spending 1 to 2 years at a large academic medical center pursuing residency, right? And during that time period, you'll likely have an employer that is a qualifying employer, meaning the employer is a nonprofit or government agency that qualifies for public service loan forgiveness. This provides you a really unique opportunity as a pharmacist that's actually pretty similar to the opportunity presented to physicians, where you'll have a low income, meaning you'll have a lower student loan payment on the income-driven repayment plan. And on top of that, you'll have a qualifying employer for PSLF. So that will get you at least 1 to 2 years, and then depending on when and how you recertify your income, maybe even longer, of a very low student loan payment period, and yet qualifying payments towards the 120 payments required for PSLF. Now, on top of that, this is a rule of thumb, not always true. A lot of clinical pharmacists end up working at major academic medical centers, especially if you are a subspecialized clinical pharmacist, just because of the nature. We all know not all community hospitals have as many resources as large academic medical centers and may have fewer subspecialized clinical pharmacy jobs available. And so oftentimes, if you go down that path, you're committing yourself to many years of a qualifying employer, which means that pursuing public service loan forgiveness should be at the top of your radar. Now, I will talk about investing in a little bit, but I want to also mention during those residency years, you'll have the lowest income tax bracket that you likely will all the way up until you retire. And so when you're thinking about investing, and I know money's tight during residency, right? A lot of clinical pharmacy specialist friends, my own sister is one, so I get it, but you still should invest some if you can. And if you do, you really should lean into Roth investing dollars. If you have a Roth IRA open or even access to a Roth 401k at work, what that does is it says, hey, I'm willing to pay my taxes now and I'm going to get tax-free growth in the future. But the willing to pay my taxes now is going to be less in those low income years than when you're earning more money when you're done with training. And so leaning into a Roth investment strategy early on, even if you can only invest a few $100s a month, very, very valuable. Now, that's a big pro from a student loan piece to pursuing residency. I have to point out the negative, which is you have 2 more years of low income years in order for you to really be done, get the full income, and feel like you have a lot of money to allocate towards investing. So if you do take that clinical pharmacy specialist route, you're gonna have to hustle when you're done to catch up because you're likely even a few years behind your retail pharmacy colleagues from an investing standpoint. So keep that in mind. Now, even if you're not taking that route, the clinical pharmacy specialist route, and you go into retail pharmacy or industry or something else out of pharmacy school, if you do that, it's unlikely, not impossible. If after pharmacy school you go into retail pharmacy, you go into industry, something else, it's less likely that you're going to have a qualifying employer for PSLF, which removes that option from you. That leaves you with taxable loan forgiveness or a standard or accelerated repayment plan. Now, of course, some people will have qualifications for a state-specific program, conversation for another day, but deciding which of those remaining paths has to take should be a very intentional, well-informed decision. If you're going to pursue taxable loan forgiveness, you should have run the numbers, understand the total cost of repayment, and understand the tax bill that will be due upon forgiveness. If you're going to pursue a standard or accelerated plan, again, you should know the total cost of repayment so that you can compare not just monthly cash flow, but which one's going to be best for the long-term picture. Of course, if you're on a taxable loan forgiveness plan, you're on an income-driven repayment plan, which likely means your monthly payment is lower. But for a lot of people, that can be the most expensive way to pay back student loan. Keep in mind as well that taxable loan forgiveness is the approach that creates the tax bomb, right? And if you know about it, you can plan for it. I mean, goodness gracious, if you can't save up for a tax bill over 20 to 25 years, we've got bigger problems. But a lot of people don't know it's coming. That's what creates the problem. And so we actually just had somebody we recently worked with who on a taxable loan forgiveness plan didn't know, and they were about 5 years away from a $100,000 tax bill, but they didn't know it was coming. So run your numbers for that. Make sure that if you don't have a qualifying employer as a pharmacist, that you're able to create a student loan strategy that fits not only the monthly cash flow you're looking for now, but also the long-term reality of what's going to cost you the most in total student loan repayment. Now, before we talk about income optimization, I do want to cover a little bit of investing. What a pharmacist should look for from an investing standpoint ends up being fairly similar to your PA, NP colleagues that may be in a similar income bracket. And that's because you likely, because you're in a similar income bracket, have similar expenses. And ultimately, what you need to retire is based upon your inflation-adjusted annual expenses, right? That's the best way to do it. Now, sometimes we look at replacing like 70 or 80% of gross income that's inflation adjusted. Both of those are reasonable. I think the most accurate way to do it is to look at it inflation adjusted true expenses. Regardless, let me just show you an example of what it looks like for a pharmacist earning $150K to replace their 80% of their inflation-adjusted income in the future. Now, before you go, pharmacist earning $150K, that's more money than I make. Well, we're going to go through income optimization in a minute, and you'll see that actually it's quite possible to double that income as a pharmacist. We'll circle back to that. So for now, let's look at these example numbers. Now, I've assumed that this person is starting at 30 with investments of $0. Okay, so if you happen to start in your 20s, you're ahead of the game. But this is what it looks like. Now, what's their goal? It's technically $7.1 million if you exclude Social Security. We could get into a whole conversation about if you should exclude Social Security, right? It's a poorly funded program. It's unlikely it won't exist in any form when we retire. I don't plan on it because I don't feel comfortable knowing what my Social Security payment will look like because of the current situation. You do what you want to do. This ignores Social Security and assumes an annual inflation rate of 2.5%, replacing 80% of your gross income right now. Some people advocate to replace 70%. Again, I think doing inflation-adjusted expenses is actually a touch better. Regardless, they need over $7 million, which seems kind of crazy. But just remember, like, go and talk to your grandparents for 2 seconds and ask them, like, hey, how much did milk cost when you were 30? How much did you spend on your first car? How much did you spend on your first house? And then we all will immediately recognize, oh my gosh, things were so much less expensive then. Things are so much more expensive now. That's inflation, right? And the same thing will happen to us. So I gave you an example of just percent of income. Didn't even get into what account structures to use, what tax diversification to use. That's kind of beyond the scope of the video. But what percent of income? If they do 10%, way short. 20%, short. Not until they hit 30% of gross do they hit the goal. And you're going, what? 30%? I hear all the time Kristin talking about like, hey, invest 20% of your gross income. Well, why is it short in this scenario? Why do they have to go all the way up to 30% to cross that threshold? And it's because they started at 30 with zero, right? If you were starting this game at 20, very different conversation, But maybe this person did undergrad, 4 years of pharmacy school, 2 years of residency, then they're finally like, okay, I got an income, I'm ready to roll. This could very easily be the reality. Or it might be undergrad, 4 years of pharmacy school, 2 years of just like figuring it out, right? And then you're like, okay, now I'm ready to start investing. Regardless, the later you start, the more you have to invest to achieve the same outcome, which is why it's so important to start the second you get the paycheck. Even if you're in residency and you're making $55,000 a year and you're barely getting by, investing $200-300 a month actually does make a big difference. So keep this in mind, these metrics, as you're trying to figure out what percent of income should I invest as a pharmacist. But you can see in this scenario, this pharmacist ends up a multimillionaire several times over and probably crosses the multimillionaire mark sooner in life than you would think, right? If they're hitting 7 million by the time they're 65, they're probably multimillionaires a few decades before that. Now, on that same token, this is example numbers of a pharmacist who does consistently and aggressively invest, but follows the Dave Ramsey plan of going about it. So in this example, Jess, the pharmacist, is going to take the Dave Ramsey approach, $1,000 emergency fund, pay off all student loan debt first, and then invest 15% of income, which is the recommendation, into actively managed mutual funds with a financial advisor. And you'll see what happens. They end up falling millions of dollars short of what for them is a standard retirement, which in this case is a little less than the last pharmacist we looked at because they earn a little bit less. But you can see this plan, again, it's because of the nature of starting late that they have this huge gap between where they need to be and where they are. Now, the other gap here is created by really high investing fees, which is what happens when you use expensive actively managed mutual funds with expense ratios greater than 1%. You tack an AUM fee on top of it. You can see they're not optimized from a fee standpoint either. But this is the picture of what your financial abundance can turn into, or lack thereof, if you don't get really intentional about the investing side right away. That's why I'll say it once, I've said it 1,000 million times before, it's not enough to have a student loan strategy. It's not enough to have an investing strategy. You have to have a cohesive plan that addresses both. And honestly, if you're doing money well, a lot of times they complement each other, especially for people who are using some more advanced student loan strategies. So this is an easy, you can see how even this pharmacist who's actually quite behind, they are almost a multimillionaire anyways, right? And so if you weren't behind, you could very, very, very easily end your life as a multimillionaire multiple times over as a pharmacist, which seems crazy, right? Because you think, oh, I only earn 6 figures and some change. How will I ever be a millionaire? It's not crazy. It's just math, and it's actually not even a pie in the sky goal. It's actually a must. Now, let's move on to income optimization. I'm going to pull up a list of pharmacy jobs that tend to have incomes in the 150 to 300,000 range, which feels really high, right? But this is actually possible. We have clients that have done this. I have personal colleagues and friends that have done this. So for you to say, hey, I'm a pharmacist, I'm never going to earn more than 130,000 a year, it's a lie. Maybe you'll never earn more than $130,000 a year at your job right now, but using your pharmacy degree and whatever skill set you've developed based on how you decided to professionally move forward after training, you can, in fact, earn quite a bit more. Now, I'm not going to read through the whole list, right? You guys can read, but I'll cover some of the big ones. One of which is moving into industry, right? It's very possible, for example, as a medical science liaison, to earn $200K, even as base, and up to $300K with bonuses. This is one of those spaces where it's really a tight job search to get into, but it's worth it if you are interested in doing the work and you are willing to take the time and effort that it takes to get there. The average job search time right now to transition to industry is about 8 to 9 months. So this isn't something you start looking for when you're like, I'm so burnt out, I can't work another day. This is something you plan ahead for. But especially if you're a clinical pharmacy specialist and you have some sort of niche knowledge of a medical subspecialty that will apply very well in the industry space, this kind of transition can actually be fairly natural. In addition, still, this is becoming less so, but still, many of these positions actually favor people with doctoral level degrees. And so this isn't all PAs, this isn't all NPs, right? Like there's still a lot of people with masters. And so pharmacists, by the nature of having a PharmD, sometimes actually have a little bit of an advantage in this space, just because you may already have that very specific pharmaceutical subspecialized knowledge, you already have a doctoral level degree, and you may also have industry connections that you built through your clinical experience. This is an example. We host guest industry expert events twice a month inside the Millionaires in Medicine Club. We recently hosted Tom Caravella, who's the founder of MSL Talk, the podcast. And he went through job search pearls of, hey, if you're a pharmacist PA and P and you want to move into industry, here are the things you need to do so that you can position yourself for the job, so that you can network the right way, so that you don't get screened out by the AI algorithms when you apply, right? Really exciting stuff. And again, totally free. All you have to do is go below. You can join and then attend these live events. But getting into this space might be tricky. Staying in the space also may be tricky too. There's a lot of turnover, but you can mitigate that risk with appropriate cash reserves, especially when you're earning such great money, right? A couple of other caveats of ways that you can really increase your income as a pharmacist involve building some accessory skill sets, namely in business. But if you're willing to move into the entrepreneurship space or the intrapreneurship space and go into a startup or even own your own independent pharmacy, the income potential really increases as well. Now, again, it's running a business. It's a different skill set. And so you can't just ride on your clinical laurels, right? You're going to have some additional skills and build up that aspect of yourself professionally. But if you're looking to transition from, earning that 130 to 150K to earning 2 or sometimes even 3 times that, that is a very valid avenue if you're willing to build yourself up. On top of that, even outside of the traditional MSL type of role in industry, if you're willing to move into the industry or regulatory affairs space and move yourself up the ladder and kind of get out of the clinical side and get more into the admin side, there's also a potential for very high income there as well. In reality, you can not only earn more money as a pharmacist, but you can become a multimillionaire many times over. You can actually save a lot of money on your student loan repayment plan if you're doing it right, you're utilizing strategy, and a pharmacist can very quickly position themselves to be on the path to genuine wealth, right? We all have this misnomer of, oh, I'm not a subspecialized surgeon earning 7 figures, so I'll never be wealthy. But here are beautiful examples of how you can actually be a really high-paid professional that is a multi-millionaire and hopefully minimally paying back student loan debt, right? And do it all at the same time and do it really well. So if you're not in the club yet, I hope you'll click the link below, join the Millionaires Medicine Club, get more information, and be around other pharmacists doing this stuff well, doing money well, so that will encourage you to do the same.